The ships came down from the sky on a Tuesday morning. They were not like anything people had seen before. The metal was too smooth, the shapes too perfect. They moved without sound, floating above the ground like they did not care about gravity. In the small town of Whitehall, Montana, people stopped what they were doing and stared up at the impossible sight. Linda Patterson was in her workshop when she heard the commotion outside. She put down her hammer and wiped the sweat from her face. Her hands were covered in soot, and her arms ached from hours of work. She had been shaping a knife blade for Old Man Henderson, who wanted something special for his grandson's birthday. The work was good, honest work, the kind her father had taught her and his father before him. She walked outside and saw the vehicles coming up her long dirt driveway. 3 of them moving in perfect formation. They did not kick up dust like normal cars. They just glided, silent and strange. Linda felt her stomach tighten. This was either the best thing or the worst thing that could happen today. The first vehicle stopped 20 feet from her workshop. The door opened, but it did not open like a normal door. It simply dissolved, becoming nothing, and then something stepped out. Linda had to remind herself to breathe. The creature was tall, maybe 7 feet, with blue skin that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. It had 4 eyes, 2 where a human would have them and 2 more on the sides of its head. It wore robes that moved even though there was no wind. More creatures emerged from the other vehicles. Some looked almost human, others were completely alien. One appeared to be made of living crystal. Another had too many arms. A third seemed to fade in and out of sight, like it was not entirely real. They gathered in a semicircle, and the tall blue one stepped forward. When it spoke, the sound came from a small device on its chest. The words were English, but the accent was strange, like someone who learned the language from books but never heard it spoken. The voice was deep and formal. "Miss Linda Patterson, we have traveled very far to find you. My name is Ambassador Vexthar of the Corvian Empire. We come in peace and with a business proposal." Linda looked at them for a long moment. Part of her brain was screaming that this could not be real. Aliens did not exist. They certainly did not show up at rural workshops in Montana. But another part of her, the practical part that her father had instilled in her, simply accepted what her eyes were showing her and moved on to the next question. "Well," she said slowly, "I suppose you better come inside and tell me what you want." She led them into her workshop. It was a converted barn, old but well-maintained. The forge in the corner was made of brick, built by her great-grandfather more than 100 years ago. Tools hung on the walls, hammers and tongs and files, all worn smooth by generations of use. The anvil in the center of the room was older than the building itself, brought over from Scotland by her ancestors. The aliens looked around with interest. Some of them touched things gently, running fingers or appendages over the tools. Linda cleared off her work table and gestured for them to gather around. There were not enough chairs, but most of them did not seem to mind standing. Ambassador Vexthar pulled out another device. This one projected images into the air above the table. Linda watched as pictures formed, showing things she could barely understand. Vast spaces filled with stars, cities that floated in nothing, battles between ships that could destroy planets. "We come from a galaxy much larger than you can imagine," the ambassador said. "Thousands of worlds, millions of species, all connected through trade and treaty. Every few cycles there is a great competition called the Trials of Ascension. The winner gains access to resources that can power entire civilizations. But to compete, one needs the right weapon." More images appeared, swords and knives and blades of every shape and size. Some glowed with inner light. Others seemed to be made of pure energy. All of them were beautiful and terrifying at the same time. "We have visited the greatest weapon makers in the galaxy," Vexthar continued. "We have commissioned blades from masters who have perfected their craft over thousands of years. Each weapon cost more than your entire planet is worth. Each one is a masterpiece of technology and skill." He paused, and something that might have been sadness crossed his strange face. "And every single one of them failed our tests. They cut, yes. They are strong, yes. But they lack something essential. They are perfect, but they are dead. There is no soul in them, no life. They are just metal shaped by machines and precision." Linda picked up the knife she had been working on when they arrived. It was rough still, barely shaped, covered in scale from the forge. She turned it over in her hands, feeling the weight and balance. It was not fancy. It would never glow or hum or do anything magical, but it was real. "And you think I can make what you need?" she asked. Vexthar nodded, all four of his eyes focusing on her with unsettling intensity. One of the other aliens stepped forward. This one looked like living crystal, faceted and gleaming. When it spoke, the voice sounded like wind chimes. "We have analyzed human-made blades," it said. "The ones created by your traditional methods. They should not work as well as they do. The metal structure is chaotic. The edge geometry is inconsistent. By all scientific measurements, they should be inferior to our manufactured weapons. Yet they perform better. They hold edges longer. They absorb impacts that should shatter them. We do not understand why, but we know it is real." Linda thought about that. She had never considered her work in scientific terms. She just did what her father taught her, what he learned from his father going back through the generations. Heat the metal until it glows the right color. Hammer it while it is hot. Fold it to make it strong. Quench it in oil at just the right moment. Sharpen it with patience and care. There was no science to it, just experience and feel. "How much time do I have?" she asked. "The trials begin in 4 standard months," Vexthar said. "But we understand that quality cannot be rushed. Take the time you need. We will pay whatever you ask." Linda walked to the window and looked out at her property. 5 acres of Montana land. The same land her family had worked for 150 years. The same forge, the same tools, the same methods. Nothing fancy, nothing high-tech. Just fire and steel and human hands. She turned back to face the aliens. They were watching her with expressions she could not read. Some seemed hopeful. Others looked skeptical. All of them were waiting for her answer. "I will do it," she said, "but I have rules. First, I work alone. No cameras, no sensors, no observers in my workshop. What I do here is between me and the metal. Second, I choose the materials. You can bring me whatever fancy metals you want, but I decide what goes into the blade. Third, I will not rush. The blade will be done when it is done, not before." Vexthar looked at his companions. There was a moment of silent communication, something passing between them that Linda could not see or hear. Then he turned back to her and nodded. "Agreed. We will bring samples of materials from across the galaxy. You will have access to ores and metals that no human has ever seen. We will pay you $1 million of your American dollars now and another $1 million when the blade is complete." Linda blinked. $2 million was more money than she had ever imagined having. She could pay off the farm, buy new equipment, never worry about money again. But that was not why she was agreeing to this. She was agreeing because they had challenged her, and she had never walked away from a challenge in her life. "You have a deal," she said, and held out her hand. Vexthar looked at her hand for a moment, then reached out with one of his own. His skin was warm and dry, not cold like she expected. They shook, human and alien, sealing a bargain that would change both of their worlds. The aliens left soon after, promising to return in 3 days with the materials. Linda stood in her driveway and watched their ships rise into the sky. They moved silently, gracefully until they were just dots against the blue. Then they were gone, and she was alone with the sound of wind through the grass and the distant call of a hawk. She walked back into her workshop and looked at the forge, at the anvil, at the tools on the walls. Somewhere out in space, beings with incredible technology were counting on her to do something they could not do. They needed human hands and human methods to create what their science could not achieve. Linda picked up her hammer and felt its familiar weight. She had a lot of work to do and not much time to do it. But first she needed to finish Henderson's knife. A promise was a promise, whether it was to an old man in Montana or an alien ambassador from across the galaxy. She lit the forge and watched the coals begin to glow. The heat built slowly, the way it always did. She placed the knife blade into the fire and waited for it to reach the right temperature. Red, then orange, then the bright yellow that meant it was ready to work. She pulled it out and brought her hammer down. The sound rang across the workshop, clear and true. It was a sound she had heard all her life, a sound that connected her to every blacksmith who had ever lived. And now, impossibly, it was a sound that would echo across the stars. 3 days passed quickly. Linda spent the time preparing her workshop and finishing her existing commissions. She wanted a clear space and a clear mind when she started the alien blade. On the 3rd morning, she woke before dawn and sat on her porch with coffee, watching the eastern sky lighten. The ships arrived exactly at sunrise. This time there were more of them, at least a dozen vehicles carrying containers of various sizes. They landed in her field, forming a neat grid. Ambassador Vexthar emerged from the lead ship, followed by several aliens she had not seen before. "Good morning, Miss Patterson," he said through his translator. "We have brought materials as promised, some from my world, others from trading partners across the galaxy. Each one has unique properties that our metallurgists believe could be useful." The containers were opened one by one. Linda walked among them, examining the contents. There were metals that glowed with their own light, crystals that felt warm to the touch, alloys that shifted color as she moved them. One material seemed to be liquid and solid at the same time, flowing but maintaining its shape. An alien that looked like a walking stick insect explained each material in detail. This one came from a star that had collapsed. That one was refined from the core of a gas giant. Another was grown in zero gravity over 1,000 years. The information was overwhelming, and Linda quickly stopped trying to remember it all. Instead, she walked slowly through the collection, letting her hands and instincts guide her. She touched each sample, lifted it, felt its weight and texture. Most of them felt wrong. Too light, too heavy, too cold, too smooth. They were impressive, certainly, but they did not speak to her the way good steel did. Finally, she came to a small, unremarkable container near the back. Inside was a chunk of dark metal, rough and pitted. It looked like it had been through hell. Vexthar noticed her interest and came over. "That is meteorite iron from the outer rim," he said. "Nothing special about it, really. Just iron and nickel that has been drifting through space for millions of years. We brought it mostly as a comparison sample." Linda picked up the chunk and turned it over in her hands. It was heavy, dense, with a texture that reminded her of the tools in her workshop. She could see where cosmic radiation had pitted the surface, where extreme cold had made the metal contract and expand over countless cycles. This metal had a history, a story written in its structure. "This one," she said. "This is what I will use." The aliens looked at each other in confusion. The stick insect alien made a sound like rattling paper. Its translator clicked and hummed before producing words. "But Miss Patterson, we have materials that are far superior. This iron is primitive. We have alloys that are 10 times stronger. Weapons-grade materials that can withstand temperatures that would vaporize normal metal. Surely one of those would be better?" Linda shook her head. She walked back to her workshop with the meteorite iron, and the aliens followed like uncertain children. She set the chunk on her anvil and looked at it in the morning light streaming through the windows. "Your materials are impressive," she said, "but I do not understand them. I do not know how they will behave when heated, how they will respond to the hammer, what they will do when quenched. This iron, though, I understand iron. My father understood iron. Every blacksmith back to the beginning of time has understood iron. It is honest metal. It does not lie or hide. It shows you exactly what it is." She picked up her hammer and held it up so they could see it clearly. "Besides," she continued, "you said your perfect alloys failed. Maybe perfection is the problem. Maybe what you need is something with character, with flaws, with a soul. This meteorite has been traveling through space longer than humans have existed. It has been shaped by forces I cannot even imagine. That is not nothing. That is everything." Vexthar was quiet for a long moment. His 4 eyes blinked in a pattern that might have meant he was thinking hard. Then he nodded slowly. "You are the expert," he said. "We trust your judgment. But may I ask what you will do with it? What is your process?" Linda smiled. It was the first time she had smiled since the aliens arrived, and it felt good. "First, I will break it down, heat it in the forge until it is workable, then fold it many times. Each fold creates layers, makes the metal stronger and more flexible. I will add high-carbon steel from my stores to give it a hard edge. Then I will shape it, finding the form that the metal wants to take. After that comes the most important part, the heat treatment. That is where the blade gets its soul." "How long will this take?" asked the crystalline alien. "As long as it takes," Linda said firmly. "Could be a few weeks. Could be longer. The metal will tell me when it is ready." She could see this answer frustrated them, but they had agreed to her terms. Vexthar herded the group toward the door. "We will leave you to your work," he said, "but I will check in each day if that is acceptable. I will not enter your workshop or observe your process. I will simply stand at the edge of your property to see that you are well." "That is fine," Linda agreed. "Just stay outside the workshop." After they left, Linda stood alone with the meteorite iron. She ran her hands over its rough surface, feeling the pits and scars. This was going to be difficult work, the most difficult of her life. But she was ready. She spent the rest of the day preparing. She cleaned the forge thoroughly, removing all ash and debris. She sorted through her coal, picking out the best pieces. She checked every tool, making sure hammers were tight on their handles. Tongs opened and closed smoothly. Files were sharp. Her quenching oil needed to be perfect. She used a recipe her grandfather had given her. Oil mixed with specific ingredients in exact proportions. Some of it was probably superstition. Her grandfather had insisted on adding 3 drops of rainwater collected during a thunderstorm. Linda had no idea if that actually did anything, but she followed the recipe exactly. Tradition had kept blacksmiths working for thousands of years. Who was she to question it now? As the sun set, she sat in her workshop and looked at the meteorite iron one more time. Tomorrow she would begin. Tomorrow, she would take this ancient metal and reshape it into something new. The thought was both exciting and terrifying. She thought about the aliens and their perfect weapons. All that technology, all that knowledge, and they could not create what they needed. They had come to Earth, to Montana, to a small workshop behind a farmhouse seeking something they had lost. They called it soul resonance, but Linda thought of it differently. They had forgotten how to work with their hands. They had let machines do everything, had optimized every process until there was no room for intuition or feel. They had achieved perfection and lost something essential in the process. Now they needed a human, someone who still knew how to listen to metal, to work with it rather than against it. Linda locked up the workshop and walked to her house. She ate a simple dinner and went to bed early. Tomorrow would be a long day, the first of many. She needed rest, but sleep did not come easily. Her mind kept circling back to the meteorite iron, thinking about how she would approach it, what techniques she would use, how to bring out its hidden potential. Finally, near midnight, she drifted off. She dreamed of fire and metal, of hammer blows ringing like bells, of steel glowing red and yellow and white. In her dream, the meteorite iron spoke to her in a language older than words, telling her its story of the void between stars, of cold and silence and endless time. She woke before dawn, feeling rested despite the short sleep. The dream had left her feeling centered and ready. She dressed in her work clothes, heavy canvas pants, and a thick leather apron. She tied her hair back tightly and pulled on her gloves. In the workshop, she built up the fire in the forge. She used good hardwood charcoal, the kind that burned hot and clean. The flames caught and grew, filling the space with light and warmth. She worked the bellows, pumping air into the coals, watching them glow brighter and brighter. When the forge was ready, she placed the meteorite iron into the heart of the fire. She would need to heat it slowly, carefully, learning how it responded. Some metals were eager, heating quickly and evenly. Others were stubborn, holding on to cold spots, refusing to cooperate. She needed to know which type this was. The iron heated slowly. She watched as the color changed from dull gray to red to orange. It was being stubborn, she decided. Proud metal, this. It had survived millions of years in space. It was not going to surrender easily to some human with a hammer. Good. She preferred metal with some fight in it. The easy ones often turned out weak. The difficult ones, if you could win them over, became partners in creation. When the iron reached a bright orange, almost yellow, she pulled it from the forge. It glowed in the dim workshop, radiating heat. She placed it on the anvil and raised her hammer. This was the moment. The first blow. The beginning of something that would either succeed brilliantly or fail completely. Linda took a breath, centered herself, and swung. The hammer connected with a solid ringing sound that filled the space. Sparks flew in all directions. The iron barely moved. She smiled. Yes, this was going to be difficult. This was going to take everything she had. She swung again, and again, and again, finding the rhythm, learning the metal's personality. Each blow taught her something new. The iron was dense but not brittle, strong but not inflexible. It had character. The days blurred together. Linda worked from sunrise to sunset, sometimes beyond. The meteorite iron was as stubborn as she had expected, maybe more so. It required constant attention, constant adjustment. Too hot and it would burn. Too cool and it would not move. She had to find the exact right temperature and maintain it perfectly. She folded the metal again and again. Each fold was a deliberate act. Heat the steel until it glows. Hammer it flat. Cut it partway through. Fold it over like dough. Weld the layers together with more heat and more hammer blows. Then do it all again, and again. Each fold doubled the layers. After 10 folds, there were over 1,000 layers. After 15, over 30,000. The work was exhausting. Her shoulders ached. Her hands developed new blisters on top of old calluses. She went to bed each night too tired to think and woke each morning eager to continue. The blade was starting to take shape, starting to reveal what it wanted to be. Every morning, Ambassador Vexthar appeared at the edge of her property. He never came closer, never spoke unless she acknowledged him first. Sometimes she waved. Sometimes she just nodded. He seemed to understand that she was deep in the work and did not want to be disturbed. On the 10th day, something changed. Linda was working the metal, hammer ringing against anvil in steady rhythm when she felt it. The iron stopped fighting her. It started cooperating, flowing under her hammer the way it should. The transformation was sudden and complete, like a wild horse finally accepting a rider. She smiled and kept working. Now the real shaping could begin. The rough bar of steel needed to become a blade. She worked carefully, drawing out the metal, tapering it from thick spine to thin edge. The form emerged gradually, like a sculpture revealing itself from stone. The blade wanted to be curved, she discovered. Not dramatically, but with a gentle arc that would make it perfect for slicing cuts. She encouraged that curve, working with what the metal wanted rather than forcing it into a shape she had planned. This was the secret her father had taught her. Listen to the metal. It knows what it wants to be. By the 14th day, the basic form was complete. The blade was roughly shaped, the curve was right, the balance was good. But it was still soft steel, not yet a weapon. Now came the most critical phase: heat treatment. This was where apprentices failed and masters proved themselves. This was where the blade would either become everything it could be or crack into useless pieces. Linda spent a full day preparing. She checked her quenching oil 3 times. She organized her workspace so everything would be within easy reach. She practiced the motions she would need to make, flowing from forge to quench tank without hesitation. There would be no second chances. Once she started the heat treatment, she had to see it through perfectly. The next morning, she woke before dawn. She did not eat breakfast. Her stomach was too tight with anticipation. She went to the workshop and built up the forge. The fire needed to be perfect today. Hot enough to bring the steel to critical temperature, but not so hot that she could not control it. When the forge was ready, she placed the blade into the coals. She watched it carefully, never looking away. The steel began to glow, first a dull red, barely visible in the morning light, then brighter red, then orange, then yellow. Color was everything in heat treatment. Too dark and the steel would not harden properly. Too bright and it would become brittle, likely to shatter. She needed the exact shade of yellow that meant the steel had reached critical temperature, the point where its internal structure would transform. The blade climbed through the spectrum. Orange faded to yellow. Yellow brightened to lemon. She watched the color carefully, comparing it to the countless other blades she had heat-treated over the years. Almost there. Almost. There. She pulled the blade from the forge. It glowed brilliantly in the shadowy workshop, almost too bright to look at directly. She moved quickly to the quench tank. No hesitation. No second thoughts. This was the moment. She plunged the blade into the oil. The reaction was immediate and violent. The oil burst into flame. Smoke billowed up, thick and acrid. The blade hissed and crackled as extreme heat met cool liquid. Linda held it steady, fighting the urge to move it or pull it out. The steel was transforming now, its internal structure shifting to the hard, strong form called martensite. She counted silently. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. At 10, she lifted the blade out of the oil and plunged it into water to complete the cooling. Steam exploded upward. The blade rang with a high, clear note that made her heart lift. That sound meant success. A cracked blade sounded dull and dead. This one sang. She lifted the blade and examined it in the light. No cracks, no warps. The curve was still perfect. Relief washed over her so strongly she had to sit down. The hardest part was done. The blade had survived its transformation, but it was not finished. The blade was now very hard, but also very brittle. It would hold an incredible edge, but it would also shatter if stressed. She needed to temper it, to trade some of that hardness for toughness and flexibility. Tempering was gentler than hardening, but no less critical. She cleaned the blade thoroughly, removing all oil and residue. Then she heated it again, but only to moderate temperature. She watched as colors played across the steel. Straw yellow appeared first, then darkened to bronze, then purple, then blue. Each color represented a different balance of properties. Yellow meant very hard but brittle. Blue meant tough but soft. She needed something in between. She let the blade heat until it showed bronze fading to light purple. That was the sweet spot for a weapon blade, hard enough to hold an edge, tough enough to handle impacts without breaking. She quenched the blade again, this time in warm water. The transformation was complete. The meteorite iron had become a blade. It was still rough, still covered in scale and forge marks, but the essential work was done. Everything from here was finishing. Linda set the blade down carefully and stepped outside. The sun was high overhead. Hours had passed without her noticing. Ambassador Vexthar was at his usual spot, and he straightened when he saw her emerge. She walked toward him and he met her halfway, staying just outside the workshop boundary she had established. He looked at her face, and something in her expression must have told him what he wanted to know. "It worked," she said simply. "The blade survived the heat treatment. Now I just need to finish it." Vexthar made a sound that his translator did not bother to interpret. Relief perhaps, or joy. His 4 eyes seemed to shine brighter than usual. "How much longer?" he asked. "A week, maybe 2. The grinding and polishing takes time if you want to do it right. And I always do it right. Take as long as you need. We have waited this long. We can wait a little longer." Linda nodded and returned to her workshop. She looked at the blade resting on her work table. It was black with scale, rough and unfinished. But underneath that rough exterior was something special. She could feel it. This was going to be the best blade she had ever made. She picked up a coarse file and began removing the scale. This was meditative work, repetitive and soothing. The file rasped across the steel, revealing the metal beneath. And as the scale came away, she saw something that made her stop and stare. The pattern welding she had created was visible now, swirling layers of dark and light steel. But it was not like any Damascus pattern she had seen before. The layers seemed to flow and twist like water frozen in time, like galaxies spiraling through space, like the northern lights dancing across a winter sky. The meteorite iron and the earth steel had not just bonded. They had created something new, something that was more than the sum of its parts. The cosmic metal had brought its history of infinite cold and radiation. The earth steel had brought its carbon and strength. Together, they had made something unique. Linda kept filing, kept revealing more of the pattern. It was beautiful. Not pretty in a decorative way, but beautiful in the way a mountain is beautiful, or a storm or the ocean. It had power and presence. It demanded respect. She worked through the afternoon and into the evening. When the light began to fail, she reluctantly stopped and lit the lamps. But the artificial light was not right for this work. She needed natural sunlight to see the patterns clearly, to judge the surface finish properly. She cleaned up her work area and locked the workshop. Tomorrow she would continue. The blade would emerge slowly, one file stroke at a time, one pass with sandpaper at a time. There was no way to rush it. Good work took the time it took. That night, Linda dreamed of stars. Not the stars as seen from Earth, but stars as seen from deep space, from the void where the meteorite iron had drifted for millions of years. She saw galaxies wheel by in their slow dance. She felt the cold that could freeze anything solid. She experienced time on a scale humans were not meant to comprehend. And through it all, the iron endured. Patient, eternal, waiting for its purpose, waiting to become something more than just metal floating through the dark, waiting for human hands to give it form and meaning. She woke with the dream still vivid in her mind. She understood now why this particular piece of iron had called to her. It had a story to tell, a story written in its very structure, and she was helping it tell that story by shaping it into a blade. Linda got up and went to the workshop even before making coffee. She needed to see the blade again, to confirm that what she remembered was. The grinding took longer than Linda had expected. The meteorite iron was incredibly hard, harder than any steel she had worked with before. Her files wore down quickly. She had to replace them several times, going through her stock of good American-made files and then ordering more from a supplier in Pennsylvania. But she did not mind. Good work was never fast. She worked through progressively finer files and abrasive papers. Each stage removed the scratches left by the previous one. The pattern became clearer and clearer. The Damascus waves seemed to move in the changing light like they were alive. On the 20th day, she began work on the edge. This was critical work. The geometry of the edge determined how the blade would cut. Too steep an angle and it would be strong but would not slice well. Too shallow and it would cut beautifully but chip easily. She needed the perfect balance. She used her belt grinder carefully, taking tiny amounts of metal with each pass. The edge emerged gradually, a thin line of brightness where the two bevels met. She checked it constantly with calipers and by eye, making sure both sides were symmetrical. When the rough grinding was done, she moved to whetstones. She had stones from Japan, Arkansas, India, each one offering different properties. She started with a coarse stone to refine the edge geometry. The blade sang as she worked it, steel scraping against stone in a rhythm as old as civilization. The coarse stone gave way to medium. Medium to fine, fine to very fine. With each stone, the edge became sharper and more refined. She could see her reflection in the polished bevels now. The Damascus pattern ran right to the edge, the layers visible even on that thin line of steel. Finally, she moved to her finest stone, a natural whetstone from Japan that had cost her a month's income 5 years ago. It was worth every penny. Under its touch, the edge became like a razor. She tested it by shaving hair from her arm. The hair fell away cleanly, cut so smoothly she barely felt it. The blade was nearly complete. She held it up to the light streaming through her workshop windows. It was beautiful. The curve was graceful and deadly. The Damascus pattern flowed like frozen water. The edge caught the light and seemed to disappear. It was so sharp and thin, but it still needed a handle. She walked to her wood storage and looked through her collection. She needed something special, something worthy of this blade. Her eyes fell on a piece of black walnut she had been saving for years. It came from a tree that had fallen during a storm on her property 10 years ago. She had milled it herself and let it dry properly. The wood was dense and dark, with grain that swirled and flowed like the pattern in the steel. Perfect. She cut 2 pieces for handle scales, shaping them carefully to fit comfortably in the hand. The curves needed to be right, ergonomic for various grips and fighting styles. She drilled holes for pins and fitted brass stock through them. The brass was salvaged from spent shell casings, another connection to tradition. Generations of craftspeople had used whatever materials were available, turning scrap into art. She was doing the same. The handle scales were attached with 2-part epoxy, strong and permanent. She clamped them carefully, making sure they were aligned perfectly. While the epoxy cured, she cleaned the blade one final time, removing any fingerprints or smudges. The next day, she shaped the handle. Files and sandpaper removed excess wood, creating smooth contours. She worked slowly, testing the grip frequently. It needed to feel right in small hands and large hands, for someone wielding it like a sword and someone using it like a knife. When the shape was perfect, she began finishing the wood. She started with rough sandpaper and worked through increasingly fine grits. The wood became smoother and smoother, its grain pattern emerging rich and dark. Finally, she applied oil, rubbing it deep into the wood. The walnut glowed with warmth, complementing the cold beauty of the steel. On the 31st day since the aliens had first arrived, Linda held the completed blade. It was done, perfect. She turned it over in her hands, examining every detail. The balance was extraordinary, the weight distributed exactly right. The edge was sharp enough to split a hair lengthwise. The Damascus pattern caught the light and seemed to glow from within. She gave it a few test swings. The blade moved through the air like it was cutting reality itself, leaving a trail that took a moment to close. That was new. That was something she had never felt before. This blade was more than just steel and wood. It had become something else, something that existed partly in this world and partly somewhere else. Linda walked outside. Ambassador Vexthar was at his usual spot, and his 4 eyes widened when he saw her approaching with the blade. She crossed to the edge of her property line and held it out to him. "It is finished," she said. Vexthar took the blade with what seemed like reverence. He held it up to the morning sun, and the Damascus pattern seemed to come alive in the bright light. He turned it slowly, examining every angle. His translator was silent, suggesting he was too overwhelmed to speak. Finally, he swung it gently through the air. His reaction was immediate. All 4 eyes went wide. His stance changed, becoming more alert. He swung again, more confidently this time. The blade moved perfectly, an extension of his arm and will. "I can feel it," he said, his voice hushed with awe. "The soul resonance. The blade is asking me what I want to cut, how I want to move. It is alive in ways I cannot explain. This is what we have been searching for. The other aliens had emerged from their ships when they saw the ambassador with the blade. The crystalline one approached and asked if she could scan it. Linda nodded. She was curious what their instruments would show. The crystal alien produced a device and passed it over the blade. The device made sounds, high-pitched and discordant. The alien looked at the readings and made noises of confusion and distress. Her translator struggled to keep up. This should not work. The internal structure is chaotic. There are stress points that should cause fractures. The edge geometry varies at the microscopic level. The carbon distribution is uneven. By every scientific principle I know, this blade should be weak and inferior. Yet my instruments show it is incredibly strong. Stronger than our best alloys. How is this possible? Linda smiled slightly. She had known this would happen. Science could measure things, but it could not always explain them. Some truths were older and deeper than equations. Your instruments measure perfection. This blade is not perfect. It is real. There is a difference. Perfection is brittle. Reality is flexible. Perfection follows rules. Reality adapts. You have optimized everything until there is no room left for life. This blade has life because it was made with hands and fire and patience, because it was allowed to become what it wanted to be instead of being forced into an ideal form. The aliens looked at each other. Linda could not read their expressions, but she sensed they were beginning to understand. They had traveled across the galaxy seeking something they had lost when they perfected their methods. They had found it in a barn in Montana, forged by a woman using tools and techniques that predated their oldest civilizations. We must test it thoroughly, Vexthar said. Not because I doubt your work, but because the trials demand it. Will you come with us to observe? Linda thought about it. She had never left Montana, never really wanted to, but she was curious about what the blade could do, about how it would perform against their advanced weapons. And she had to admit the idea of seeing alien technology up close was appealing. All right, I will come. But I am not leaving Earth until I deliver Henderson's knife. I made a promise, Vexthar nodded. Of course, a craftsperson's word is sacred. We will wait. Linda went back to her workshop and finished the hunting knife for Old Man Henderson. It was good work, solid and practical, nothing fancy. But it was honest work, and she took pride in it. She delivered it that afternoon, and Henderson examined it with the eye of someone who understood quality. Best knife I ever seen, he said. My grandson is going to love this. What do I owe you? Same as always. $50 for materials and labor. Henderson paid her in cash, as he always did, and shook her hand. She drove back to her farm, feeling satisfied. She had completed all her obligations. Now she could focus on what came next. The aliens were preparing a ship for the tests. It was larger than the others, with space for equipment and observers. Linda packed a small bag with clothes and essentials. She did not know how long she would be gone. Days, maybe. Possibly weeks. Before she left, she walked through her workshop one last time. The forge was cold and dark. The tools hung on their hooks. Everything was clean and organized, ready for her return. This place had been her life for years. It had been her father's life before that, and his father's before him. She had made something here that would change the galaxy. A simple blade forged with fire and hammer in a converted barn. It was impossible and ridiculous and absolutely true. She locked the door and walked to the waiting ship, ready to see what came next. The testing facility was unlike anything Linda had imagined. It was on a space station orbiting a moon she did not know the name of. The interior was massive, with chambers dedicated to different types of tests. Material science, structural analysis, combat simulation. The aliens had been very thorough in designing this place. Ambassador Vexthar led her to an observation deck overlooking the main testing arena. Through the transparent wall, she could see robots setting up equipment. The blade she had forged was mounted on a display stand in the center, looking small and humble among all the advanced technology. We will begin with basic materials testing, Vexthar explained. Hardness, flexibility, impact resistance. Then we will move to edge retention and cutting performance. Finally, if it passes those tests, we will test it against energy weapons. Linda nodded. She was nervous but confident. The blade was good. She knew it was good. But she also knew that confidence and reality did not always match. The test would tell the truth. The first test measured hardness. A diamond-tipped instrument pressed into the blade at various points, measuring how deeply it penetrated. The crystalline alien watched the readings with interest, her faceted body reflecting the lights of the instruments. "Hardness readings are exceptional," she announced, "higher than most of our manufactured alloys. But hardness alone is not enough. Hard materials are often brittle." The next test checked flexibility. The blade was clamped at one end and pressure was applied to bend it. Linda watched as the curve increased. The blade flexed smoothly, no sudden jumps or cracks. When the pressure was released, it sprang back to its original shape perfectly. "Remarkable," the crystal alien said. "It combines high hardness with excellent flexibility. This should not be possible with traditional metallurgy." The impact test came next. A heavy weight was dropped on the blade from increasing heights. Each impact created a loud ringing sound that echoed through the chamber. The blade absorbed each hit without cracking or deforming. After 20 impacts, it looked exactly as it had at the start. Vexthar turned to Linda with all four eyes wide. "Your blade has just passed tests that destroyed 17 other weapons. And we have barely begun." The cutting tests were more dramatic. The blade was mounted in a mechanical arm and used to cut through various materials: rope, leather, wood, plastic, metal bars of different compositions. Each material fell away cleanly, the blade showing no signs of dulling or damage. When they tested it against a bar of hardened steel, Linda expected some resistance. The blade cut through it like it was soft wood. The watching aliens made sounds of amazement, their translators struggling to keep up with their excited chatter. After 50 cuts through various materials, they examined the edge under high magnification. Linda watched the screen as the microscope zoomed in on the blade. The edge was still perfect. No chips, no rolls, no visible dulling. "This is impossible," the stick insect alien said. "Edge retention like this does not exist. We have materials that can cut well initially, but they all degrade with use. This blade has not degraded at all. If anything, it seems sharper now than when we started." Linda thought about that. She had heard of blades that got sharper with use, but she had always assumed it was myth. Maybe there was something to it. Maybe the cutting action aligned the edge at a microscopic level, perfecting it through use. Vexthar called for a break. The aliens needed to recalibrate their instruments and prepare for the final tests. Linda used the time to stretch her legs and explore the observation deck. Through different windows, she could see the moon below, barren and gray, and beyond it a gas giant that filled half the sky with swirling colors. It was beautiful and terrifying. She was farther from Earth than any human had ever been, farther than she had ever imagined being, but she did not feel afraid. She felt curious and a little proud. Her work had brought her here. Her skill with fire and hammer had opened doors to the stars. When testing resumed, the energy weapon trials began. Linda leaned forward, watching closely. This was the critical test. Physical cutting was one thing. Standing up to energy weapons was something else entirely. The first weapon was a plasma cutter, the kind used to slice through starship hulls. A robot wielded it, bringing the glowing beam toward the blade. Linda held her breath. The plasma met the steel. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the blade began to glow where the plasma touched it. But instead of melting or burning, the steel absorbed the energy. The glow spread along the edge, bright white-hot, and then faded. The plasma cutter sputtered and died. The observation deck went silent. Every alien was staring at the blade. Vexthar spoke first, his voice hushed. It absorbed the plasma. The blade absorbed directed energy and dispersed it safely. This should not be possible. Plasma cutters can slice through anything physical. They tried again with a more powerful weapon. Same result. The blade glowed, absorbed the energy, and remained undamaged. A third test with a laser produced similar results. The beam hit the blade and scattered, reflected in every direction, but the steel itself was unharmed. Linda thought she understood what was happening. The meteorite iron had spent millions of years in space, bombarded by cosmic radiation and solar wind. It had learned, in a sense, to handle energy. The folded structure created pathways for energy to travel and dissipate. The blade was not blocking the energy weapons. It was drinking them in and spreading them out until they were harmless. The final test was against a weapon called a molecular disruptor. Vexthar explained that it broke down atomic bonds, causing matter to simply fall apart. No known material could resist it for long. Even their best alloys lasted only seconds. The disruptor fired. A beam of invisible energy struck the blade. For a long moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the blade began to vibrate, ringing like a struck bell. The sound grew louder and louder until it was almost painful to hear. And then it stopped. The blade was intact. Not just intact, but completely unchanged. The disruptor had failed to affect it at all. The crystalline alien approached the window, pressing close to the transparent surface. She seemed to be having trouble processing what she had witnessed. The molecular bonds should have broken. The atomic structure should have collapsed. But instead, the blade resonated at a frequency that countered the disruptor field. It defended itself through harmonic opposition. This is not metallurgy. This is something else entirely. Bexthar turned to Linda. His expression was difficult to read, but his voice held wonder and respect. Miss Patterson, you have created something that should not exist. A blade that defeats every weapon we possess. A tool forged with fire and hammer that surpasses our most advanced technology. I do not understand how this is possible, but I know it is real. Linda smiled. She was tired and overwhelmed, but also deeply satisfied. She had proven something important, that the old ways still had value. That human craftsmanship could compete with alien science. That soul and skill mattered more than perfection and precision. It is possible because I did not try to make it perfect. I let the metal be what it wanted to be. I worked with it, not against it. Every fold, every hammer blow, every heating and cooling cycle, I listened to what the steel was telling me. That is the secret your civilizations forgot. Materials are not dead things to be forced into shape. They are partners in creation. The aliens looked at each other. Linda could see they were beginning to grasp something important, something they had lost over thousands of years of technological advancement. Bexthar bowed, a gesture Linda recognized as showing deep respect even across species. We came to Earth seeking a weapon for the trials. We found something far more valuable. We found a teacher. Will you share your knowledge with the galaxy? Will you teach us what we have forgotten? Linda thought about it carefully. She thought about her workshop, her tools, her quiet life in Montana. She thought about the generations of blacksmiths who had passed down their knowledge through demonstration and practice. She thought about what it would mean to teach aliens, to spread human craftsmanship across the stars. I will teach anyone who wants to learn, but they need to understand it will not be easy. They will need to start at the beginning. They will need to learn to build a fire, to judge steel by its color, to develop the feel for when something is right. There are no shortcuts. This knowledge comes from doing the work, from making mistakes and learning from them. Can your people accept that? Bexthar nodded, all four eyes blinking, and what Linda had learned was a sign of determination. They can and they will. We have chased perfection for so long that we forgot the value of the journey. You will teach us to remember. And so it began. Linda Patterson, blacksmith from Montana, became a teacher to the stars. The blade she forged in her backyard would go on to win the trials of ascension. But more importantly, it would spark a revolution in how the galaxy thought about creation, craftsmanship, and the value of doing things the slow, difficult right way. The trials of ascension were held 3 months later on a neutral station that orbited a dying star. Linda attended as a guest of honor, wearing clothes that the aliens had made for her. They were comfortable but strange, adapting to her body temperature and moving with her in ways that normal fabric did not. The station was enormous, large enough to hold thousands of beings from hundreds of different worlds. She saw species she could not have imagined. Some walked, some floated, some existed as energy contained in special suits. The diversity was overwhelming and wonderful. The Corvian champion who would wield her blade was named Greg. He had chosen a human name to honor her work, which she found touching. Greg was massive, 7 feet tall with 4 arms and skin that shifted between blue and purple depending on the light. He moved with the grace of someone who had spent a lifetime training for combat. Linda met him 2 days before the trials began. He was nervous, which surprised her. She had assumed someone so skilled would be confident, but he explained that the other competitors were legendary warriors. He was young by Corvian standards, barely 100 years old. This was his first trials. Show me how you hold it, Linda said. Greg picked up the blade and took a fighting stance. His grip was good, his posture balanced, but something was off. Linda circled him, studying the way he held the weapon. You are fighting the blade. You are trying to control it, force it to do what you want. That will not work. This blade has a soul. It wants to work with you, not for you. Relax, let it guide you. Trust it. Greg looked skeptical but tried. He loosened his grip slightly. adjusted his stance. Linda watched as something shifted. The blade stopped being a tool he held and became an extension of his arm. His posture changed, became more natural and fluid. There. That is it. Feel how it wants to move. The curve guides your cuts. The balance tells you when to strike and when to wait. Listen to it. Greg swung the blade experimentally. Then again, more confidently. A smile spread across his face. I understand. It is not a weapon. It is a partner. Exactly. On the day of the trials, the arena was filled to capacity. Linda sat in a special viewing area with Ambassador Vexthar and other dignitaries. The arena floor was massive, easily 100 yards across. The surface could change to simulate different environments, from bare rock to dense forest to zero gravity. The competition format was simple, single elimination combat. Each match continued until one fighter yielded or was incapacitated. Killing was not required, though it was allowed. The weapons could be anything the fighter chose, and any fighting style was permitted. Greg's first opponent was a warrior from a species that looked like armored insects. Its weapon was an energy lance that hummed with power. The crowd expected a quick match. Energy weapons were considered superior to physical blades. Everyone knew that. The match began. The insect warrior struck first, moving with blinding speed. The energy lance came down in an arc meant to cleave Greg in half. Greg raised the blade and met the lance. The lance shattered. The energy blade simply ceased to exist where it touched the steel. The insect warrior stared at its weapon in confusion. The crowd gasped. This was not supposed to happen. Greg did not hesitate. He flowed forward and struck with the flat of the blade, knocking his opponent down without serious injury. The insect warrior yielded immediately. The match was over in seconds. The crowd erupted in noise. Cheers and protests and confusion all mixed together. The judges conferred, checking if what happened was legal. It was. Nothing in the rules said a blade could not defeat an energy weapon. It just had never happened before. The second match went similarly. The opponent wielded a crystalline sword that could cut through starship armor. It met the steel blade and cracked down its length, falling to pieces. Greg won again. By the third match, word had spread. The viewing areas were packed with beings who wanted to see the impossible blade from Earth. Linda watched as Greg faced a warrior wielding plasma whips. The whips wrapped around the blade. The plasma flickered and died where it touched the steel. Greg disarmed his opponent with a swift move and won his third match. The victories continued. Each opponent fell. Each advanced weapon proved useless against simple steel forged with fire and hammer. The crowd's reaction shifted from disbelief to fascination to awe. They were witnessing something unprecedented. A primitive weapon defeating the galaxy's most advanced technology. The final match was against the defending champion, a being made of pure energy who wielded weapons of compressed light. This was expected to be the real test. Energy against energy. Surely the blade could not stand against this. The champion attacked with everything it had. Beams of light, waves of force, constructs of pure energy. Greg met each attack with the blade. The steel absorbed it all, glowing white-hot but never melting, never breaking. The blade sang as it moved, a high, clear note that filled the arena. Finally, Greg saw his opening. He struck not with the edge but with the flat, hitting the champion's containment field. The field flickered. The champion reformed at the edge of the arena and raised a hand in surrender. The match was over. Greg had won. The Corvian Empire had won the trials, and Linda's blade had defeated every weapon the galaxy could produce. The celebration afterward was overwhelming. Beings from every corner of the galaxy wanted to meet Linda, to ask questions about her methods. She answered as best she could, but she knew words were not enough. They needed to experience it themselves. That night, back in her quarters, Ambassador Vexthar visited with a proposal. His people wanted to establish a school, not on their world but on Earth, in Montana if Linda was willing. They would send students from across the galaxy to learn from her. To learn the old ways, the human ways, the methods that had been forgotten in the rush toward perfection. Linda thought about her small workshop, her quiet life. Teaching would change everything, but it would also preserve something important, and it would spread knowledge that the galaxy desperately needed. I will do it. But it has to be done right. No shortcuts, no modifications for convenience. Students must learn everything from the beginning. They must build their own forges. They must make their own tools. They must fail and try again until they understand. Can your people accept that? Vexthar's 4 eyes gleamed. They will. We have learned that the hard way is sometimes the only way. Thank you, Linda Patterson. You have given us more than a weapon. You have given us back something we lost long ago. Linda returned to Earth a week later. The trip back felt faster than the trip out, though the distance was the same. She had changed during her time in space, seen things no human had seen, watched her work triumph on the grandest stage imaginable, but she was glad to be home. Her workshop looked exactly as she had left it. The forge cold and dark, the tools on their hooks, everything waiting for her return. She walked through the space slowly, running her hands over familiar surfaces. This was where it all began. This was where it would continue. Within a month, construction began on the school. The aliens were true to their word. They built around her original workshop, preserving it as the heart of the new facility. Dormitories for students, multiple forge spaces, libraries, but all designed to support traditional methods, not replace them. The first class of students arrived 3 months later. 20 beings from 15 different worlds. Some were young, some were old. All were eager to learn. Linda looked at them and felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. This was going to be harder than forging any blade. She started them with the basics. Building a fire, understanding coal and charcoal, reading temperatures by color. Concepts so simple they seemed trivial, but the students struggled. They were used to precise instruments and digital readouts. Judging by eye and feel was foreign to them. After a week, half wanted to quit. It was too hard, too imprecise, too frustrating. Linda gathered them together and spoke plainly. You came here because your civilizations lost something important. You have technology that can reshape planets, but you cannot make a simple blade with soul. Do you know why? Because you forgot how to struggle. You forgot how to fail. You forgot that the journey matters as much as the destination. If you leave now, you will go back to your perfect, soulless creations. If you stay and push through this frustration, you will learn something that no machine can teach you. The choice is yours. They stayed. All of them. And slowly, painfully, they began to learn. They learned patience. They learned to trust their senses. They learned that perfection was the enemy of excellence. They learned to work with materials instead of dominating them. Years passed. The school grew. More students came. Linda trained assistants who could teach the basics while she focused on advanced techniques. Her methods spread across the galaxy, changing how beings thought about creation and craftsmanship. On her 60th birthday, Linda stood in her original workshop. The walls were covered with photos now, students from dozens of worlds holding blades they had forged with their own hands, each one unique, each one imperfect, each one alive in ways that manufactured weapons could never be. The original blade, the one that had won the trials, hung on the wall behind her. It had been retired, deemed too valuable to risk. Scientists still studied it, still tried to understand its properties. Linda found that amusing. Some things could not be understood through analysis.